been on several of my tours and programs before know that instead of me trying to carry around big pictures and doing like this, I'm just going to pass out all the pictures to you guys. So what I've done is I put together a little packet with some maps highlighting our route, as well as some historic photographs that we'll be referencing. I've got about 60 of these, so I don't think it's quite enough for everybody to have one, but it's definitely, I think, enough for kind of each couple, I guess. I know a lot of you guys are here with a family, so kind of each group can get one. So we'll start passing these around here. Get a set started in the middle here. There you go, sir.
The trees
We're going to start some back in here.
That's good.
All right, one quick just logistical thing. If y'all will do me a favor, and let's make sure we at least kind of keep a little bit of a path open on the bridge, maybe kind of on the back side there. There are going to be some other joggers and runners, and we don't want to kidnap them. I only want to kidnap you all.
Oh, sorry. I should have passed it the other way. There's a
So while these are passing around, I just want to talk for just a couple of minutes about what we're going to be doing today, where all we're going to be going, and kind of what I hope that y'all kind of get out of this. So, as many of you guys know, I know there's a lot of familiar faces here, a lot of Chattanoogans I see here, and as many of you guys know, Chattanooga's identity, kind of in the modern era, is kind of defined by a few rather famous locations here in the downtown area. So much of Chattanooga's identity is shaped by the Market Street Bridge, the Tennessee Aquarium, the 21st Century River Park down here, the River Walk, the Chattanooga Lookout, the AT&T Field there behind us. But what we're going to be doing today is visiting some of these sites and some of Chattanooga's modern icons and kind of peeling back the layers a little bit to get a sense for kind of what was here at the time of the Civil War and how the riverfront, just kind of how it's defined Chattanooga today, it defined Chattanooga during the Civil War. I've got a few spares. Anybody want one? Anybody who doesn't want to share with your partner? Okay. Sorry. There you go. Anybody else? All right. I'm going to hand you this.
Love the pamphlets.
All right. So real quick, a couple of things just to get you oriented. If you look at the picture up on the top there, you'll see my name and email address. If at any point later you decide, oh man, I got a question I wanted to ask, or I didn't want to ask in front of everybody, you can shoot me an email, and I'm more than happy to send that to you. I'm also more than happy to email you a PDF copy of this if you decide you would just like your own copy of this map. But what we're looking at in that top picture is fairly similar to the view that we can see here. This photograph was taken in 1865, and it's a photograph of Chattanooga's waterfront. So a couple of things to note is you've got the military bridge that was built in the spring of 1864. That bridge is basically right where the Market Street Bridge is. If you look just on the other side of the Market Street Bridge, you can see AT&T Field where the Chattanooga Lookouts play. And if you're looking at that picture, that's that little small hillside that's just above the bridge. And then of course Cameron Hill, which today is home to the Blue Cross Blue Shield. At the time of the Civil War, it was about twice as high, and you can see that there in the photograph as well. Also in that photograph, you don't necessarily know this yet, but you can see almost our entire walking route is confined within that photograph. Which, speaking of our route, I'd like to point out a couple of things to you. The bottom two images on there are two maps. Both of these are from the Hamilton County GIS. And so the top map, or the middle map there, you can see our route is highlighted in red, what we're going to be doing today. We're going to come down the Walnut Street Bridge, we're going to turn down 1st Street, then cut down Market Street a block, we're going to then turn down Aquarium Way, which historically was 2nd Street, come out on the River Park, and we'll basically follow the River Walk back up to the Hunter Art Museum, and then right back down to your cars. Now, if you want to kind of see what that looked like in 1865, this bottom map is something I'm incredibly excited about and really wanted to share with folks today. In December of 1865, the Union Army, the United States Army, the surveying department created a map of Chattanooga, and they did it to scale, which is really kind of astounding for that time period. What they did is they took the historic, or the surveying plan for the city of Chattanooga and overlaid kind of all of their fortification every building on there. And this is just one small segment of that map. This map is actually huge. It goes all the way out to the National Cemetery. And the cool thing is, each and every one of you guys has access to this map. So if you want to know where something was in the city of Chattanooga or what was on its spot, I've got the website for that there underneath it. It's http://gis.hamiltontn.gov. And then that's the Hamilton County GIS, which is a geographic mapping system. And what you can do is actually go in there, and it's got a little that says Civil War. Select Civil War, and this map is called the 1865 military map of Chattanooga. And it's really cool. And so if you're looking at that, as you can see, we're going to come down the Walnut Street Bridge there, which did not exist at that time. We're going to turn down what was then First Street then, it's First Street now. Come down Market Street. We're going to turn through 2nd Street, walk through some Army corrals, stop at the base of a fortification, loop up back behind some warehouses, come up to some Confederate fortifications, and then cross back over this way. It's a really cool map, and I encourage you when you get home, get on the internet and play with that one a little bit. But the other thing I want to kind of talk about while we're here on the Market Street Bridge is the idea that sometimes these layers that we're going to peel back today are not just about a physical space and a story. Sometimes it's about a legacy. And so I want to talk just briefly about the Walnut Street Bridge and kind of its connection to the Civil War. Now, this bridge was built in 1890, so it obviously was not here at the time of the Civil War. The Union Army built a military bridge, which you can see on that front picture, basically where the Market Street Bridge is today. The Market Street Bridge follows almost exactly the original route of that 1864 bridge. It's off by about 10 yards on this end. On that end, it's right on it. So pretty spot on. However, that bridge washed away in 1867, a couple of years after the Civil War. There was a huge flood, the flood of 1867. To give you an idea of just how high those floodwaters got, if you look across the Tennessee Aquarium, that's the brick building with the little glass pyramids on the top, the water got as high as the glass pyramids. That's a pretty terrifying flood, and that bridge right there did not survive it. And so the military bridge was washed away, and so for about 25 years, there was no bridge connecting the North Shore to the South side. Now, why is that important? Well, that gets us into kind of just back into the Civil War. When the United States Army, when the Union Army captured the city of Chattanooga in the fall of 1863, just as what had happened in many locations throughout the South, large numbers of enslaved people would basically run away. They would emancipate themselves and go to places where the Union Army had set up. And so they start coming here in very large numbers. However, Chattanooga's got a little quirk to it. It's in Tennessee.
Our houses are in the
And
shop.
Tennessee had been excluded from the Emancipation Proclamation, which meant that legally speaking, the Union Army was actually supposed to be enforcing slavery here, which is a little weird to think about. But they don't want to just send all these people back. And so what ends up happening is a large number of enslaved people started an encampment that became known as Camp Contraband on the North Shore. And if you flip the page here and you look at this picture where you can see the military bridge, there's a steamboat. If you look just above the military bridge there, you can actually kind of make out a gathering of huts and buildings up there. That is Camp Contraband. And to give you guys a sense for where that was, if you look this direction, you're looking into it. Camp Contraband was located kind of where, matter of fact, if you see the building that says Signal Mill, you guys kind of see that where Food Works is. They just opened up a Mean Bug coffee shop. There's a barbecue joint in there. Kind of going up Cherokee Boulevard. That was Camp Contraband. Now, at the end of the Civil War, what the situation we've got here is there's about 5,000 African Americans living in the city of Chattanooga. And they're being employed as laborers in a lot of the warehouses and stuff. We're actually going to visit some of the sites of in just a minute. They're being employed as laborers over there. That bridge, the military bridge, is how you get back and forth. So when the bridge washes away, all the business leaders in Chattanooga are now cut off from their labor force. And so for a long time, they had to run ferries. Basically resorted back to the old ferry at Ross's Landing. Well, ferries are a little fickle. You get a good windy day with a lot of whitecaps out here, it doesn't work real well. It's storming, ferries don't work real well. So there was a movement to create a bridge, and that's the one that we're standing on now. The Walnut Street Bridge was built in 1890 to effectively connect the city of Chattanooga to the black laboring class here in the city. And so that's one of the reasons why this bridge kind of formed this boundary between the black world and the white world in Chattanooga. That's a big reason why this bridge was used as the site of several lynchings, because it was effectively a boundary between these two spots. And so you can see there's a little small inset photograph of a man named Ed Johnson, who is certainly the most famous of the lynching victims here off the Walnut Street Bridge. He was lynched in March of 1912. And as some of you guys know, there's actually a movement afoot to create a monument here on the bridge for him. It's called the Ed Johnson Project, if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But again, none of those things happened here during the Civil War. But they're happening here as kind of a result of the legacy of the Civil War. And even today, this bridge is still kind of here as a legacy of kind of the aftermath of the war. Before we kind of move on to our next stop, you got questions, comments, concerns so far? All right. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to keep heading out to the end of the bridge, and we're going to kind of gather up at the intersection of Walnut and First Street. Where the dog with the high five, where the dog who high five you. I know, I've managed to fool people this far. I actually don't know what I'm talking about. I just found this uniform, Goodwill.
Need a rancher.
All right, well, I think we've got just about everybody caught up to us. So, welcome to the Union Army's headquarters in 1864 and 1865. Here along the bluffs of the Tennessee River, kind of what is now the Bluffview Arts District, you can see the Hunter Art Museum back behind you guys. Before the Civil War, this neighborhood, kind of right along Walnut Street and then along, believe it or not, this little walking path right here was called First Street. This was kind of where some of the more prominent Chattanoogans lived in the years before the Civil War. So think, this is a bunch of rich people's houses. So once the Union Army captured the city of Chattanooga in November of 1863, rich guys' houses tend to make really good places for headquarters for generals for a number of reasons. First off, rich people's houses tend to be pretty big. There's a lot of rooms in them. Generals have big staff, so you've got rooms for the general to sleep in. You've got a kitchen. You've got a few extra rooms for officers to be able to do staff work in there. And so if you look at the historic map there on the front page, if you'll kind of notice down along Walnut Street, which is moving down here, and then along First Street, which is the route that we're going to be taking, right down here, you'll notice a series of buildings there. Almost all of those buildings were pre-war residences that were used as headquarters by the Union Army. And so if you look back at the picture underneath our steamboat here, this is supposedly the house that stood at this intersection right here. If you were looking back at that map, it's kind of a green color. You can see the little fence stand around it. So the front door to that house would have kind of faced right here, and we're standing kind of on the side of that house that you see in the picture. That is, at least according to some labels, and I don't ever really completely trust these historic photograph labels because they're a little inconsistent, but most of them label that photograph as General William Sherman's headquarters at 110 First Street. And so I do appreciate the irony of the fact that William Sherman, the guy most famous for lighting some fires, has an ice cream stand at his headquarters. They're really missing out on a marketing opportunity. Uncle Billy's ice cream or something. I would eat there like every day. Need some good themed ice cream names. But this is not the only one of these structures. And one of the neat things is that we know where a lot of these houses, where a lot of these headquarters were, because in the 1890s, when they created Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, they had a huge dedication down at the battlefield, down at Chickamauga Battlefield in 1895. And so they were expecting large numbers of veterans to come back. And so several prominent Chattanoogans began to publish guidebooks for the old veterans looking for places you might recognize. And those guidebooks are all online now. If you're familiar with websites like Google Books and Archive.org and the Hate Thee Trust, you can read all of these things online now, and they're really neat because they make a point to go through and say, would you like to visit General So-and-so's headquarters? It's still standing, and it is at, and and it gives you the address. And I've got a bunch of these addresses printed here, but I'm gonna kind of rattle some of these off for some of you guys that aren't where you can see a sheet, or if I printed it too small for you. Before the Union Army took over, General Braxton Bragg, commander of the Confederate Army of Tennessee, he had his headquarters located at 407 East 5th Street, so just up the road here. General Rosecrans' headquarters, he was the commander of the Union Army of the Cumberland at the time of the Battle of Chickamauga, and for the first part of the siege of Chattanooga, his headquarters was right up the road here at 316 Walnut Street, right down this street. Once he got relieved and General Ulysses S. Grant came in, General Grant set up headquarters at 316 Walnut Street, right through the fences here. Now General Grant didn't stay there for long, and he moved to 110 First Street, right here. General Sherman also had headquarters set up here. General James Garfield, who was the Chief of Staff of the Union Army of the Cumberland and was later President of the United States, his headquarters was at 326 Walnut, right up the road here. General James Brennan is at 302 Walnut. General Carlin, commanded a division, is at 218 Boyce Street. The Provost Marshal is kind of Army speak for Army police. If you misbehave, those are the people that are going to arrest you. They were at the northwest corner of West 7th and Broad Street. The Adjutant General of the Army of the Cumberland was at the northeast corner of East 4th and Walnut Street, just up the road here. And during the Confederate occupation, the Adjutant General of the Army of Tennessee was at the northeast corner of East 4th and High Street, so just on the other side of the buildings back behind you guys here. And so, to me, this is one of these neat little stories to talk about, is that if we were standing right here in the fall of 1864 into 1865, kind of overlooking Chattanooga's waterfront, we wouldn't see an ice cream stand and bike rental places. We would probably be turned away because there'd be lots of guards standing out here. I mean, this is the principal's office. For those of you guys that are not that far from school, was kind of located right here on this corner. And this is also, so because this is where some of those headquarters and stuff are going to be, there's some other neat photographs that were taken here. One of my favorite is the one printed along the bottom there. The Union Army during the Battle of Missionary Ridge on November 25th, 1863, captured a large number of Confederate cannon. Now, they didn't exactly know what to do with all of those cannon at first, so they brought them here and lined them up down Walnut Street.
If you were trying to read it.
That row of cannon is going to be, if you kind of look through the fence there, you kind of see the road where it says East 3rd. That line of cannon is kind of right along through there, right about where it says East 3rd. If you're looking at your historic map on the front page to get you lined up there, if you follow Walnut Street down, they're right about where in between 2nd and 3rd, you see there's a big open space. They're on both sides of the road. That's where they've got the cannon is lined up right there. So just right here. So right where all this new construction is where they had a bunch of cannons set up. And it's why I'm lobbying that we start doing cannon firing demonstrations right here. Once they get all these apartments set up, we're going to do this every morning, and that's going to be their wake-up call.
I'll help you out.
Yeah, who else? All in favor? Yeah, here we go. And somebody, one of you guys has already got like a lease on these places. No. But again, this really is kind of a neat spot when we think about Chattanooga's history. Not only because, you know, the Walnut Street Bridge and the Art Museum and all this stuff, but because this is the center of Union Army operations, not only here in Chattanooga, but throughout the Southeast. Once the Union Army captured Chattanooga, this became their kind of operational and logistical supply hub for everything happening in Atlanta. The Atlanta campaign was planned from this ice cream shop. It wasn't an ice cream shop, obviously. Now everybody's going to want ice cream here at the end of the day. All right, all in favor, cancel the tour. Do that after when we warms up a little bit. So all of that stuff going on down in Atlanta is all going to be kind of planned from here along this stretch along 1st Street and headed down Walnut Street. This is the center of where the Civil War is won and lost. People kind of tend to think about, you know, the big famous battles back east, Gettysburg, some of those things, but it's really kind of that Atlanta campaign and the campaigns for Chattanooga is ultimately what kind of rips the heart out of the Confederacy. And this is the brain of that, right where we're standing. And so where one Texan later wrote, he said, we knew that losing Chattanooga is the death knell of the Confederacy. That death knell is planned from where you're standing. You probably have to have some kind of security clearance to be standing right here in 1864. before we kind of continue on down First Street, do we have questions, comments, concerns? Yes.
I'm sorry if I missed it. The houses here, Generals didn't build. Do we know who they belong to prior?
Yes, a few of them we do. There's a guy named David Key who owned one of the houses right through here. A lot of these folks had kind of left about the time the battle started to approach Chattanooga. They're relatively wealthy. Some of them are actually in the Army. So, for example, David Key was actually in the Confederate Army. And so when they left, it's kind of leaving these, let's say, abandoned houses, but not exactly occupied houses, kind of right along through here. And that's just kind of convenient. You know, just kind of convenient to just walk in and set up. But yeah, there's a number of one of them's called the Latner House. My name's Latner. And so a lot of, you know, so yes, we do know some of them that you can kind of piece together. Proper? Not really. Kind of, as you get out into the outskirts, there's a few. The most notable one kind of in the Chattanooga area is going to be the Browns Ferry Tavern, kind of out in Lookout Valley. That was built in the 1820s, really before Chattanooga was even created. And it would have been here at the time of the war. Down in Rossville, you've got the John Ross House was here. Moving a little bit farther south, down towards Chickamauga, Lee and Gordon's Mill was standing at the time. There's some great pictures of soldiers hanging out off of that. And then the Gordon Lee Mansion that had been General Rosecrans' headquarters for a little bit. Now this is going to depress some of you, but if you'd asked me that question in about 1960, well, you could have asked me that question in 1960, but if you had asked that question in 1960, the answer would have been yes. There were still actually a couple of houses out along this corridor that were still standing. In the 60s and 70s, some of the structures associated with the train station, kind of out where the kind of near where the library is today, some of those were still standing. And but in that time period, there wasn't a huge push to say we need to preserve historic buildings. So, you know. The Reed House? So the Reed House was where the Reed House is now. The Reed House was not there, but that's where the Crutchfield House was, which was kind of a large hotel that was also used a little bit as a kind of temporary quarters for officers kind of coming in and out because it was set up right by the train station. Of course, the most famous Civil War story in the Crutchfield House is in 1861 when Jefferson Davis passed through kind of on a tour of the South. He got off at the train station, went and tried to stay at the Crutchfield House, but Mr. Crutchfield was a staunch Unionist and wanted no part of Jeff Davis in his property. And he shared his opinion on that matter rather famously here in Chattanooga anyway. It didn't end well, but you know, but he survived. Yes?
Wasn't there a big ebb and flow of Confederates in Chattanooga?
Which time period are we kind of talking like?
During the Civil War.
Yeah, I mean,
back and forth, it was a rebel area at one time.
Yeah.
And the Confederates moved that, not just the soldiers, but the residents.
Right. So for those of y'all that didn't hear the question, he was kind of asking you how much ebb and flow was there of Confederates coming in and out of Chattanooga over the course of the war, and there's quite a lot. The Confederates were using this kind of as a rail hub in 1861, 62. A lot of the people that were in Chattanooga were relatively pro-Confederate. As the war starts to approach, a lot of them kind of flee the area, and a lot of Unionists move in. So there's certainly a lot of ebb and flow back and forth on that. All right, well, let's take off down First Street and get down towards Market. I had the microphone is no one's setting up right next to Market Street would get a little bit wonky. That's the other reason we did this early in the morning is you definitely wouldn't be able to hear me at noon. So And I guess we'll need to keep an eye out if the manager or somebody from Buffalo Wild Wings needs to turn in. We'll
only 10
need to clear
o'clock.
out a little bit. So we're standing at the intersection, or pretty close to it. So this is Aquarium Way. In 1864, 1865, this was 2nd Street. So if you're looking at your map here, on your historic map there, we are standing, there's kind of right at the intersection of 2nd and Market there. You can kind of see on the right side a couple of little buildings there, or at least one small little brown-colored L-shaped building. We're basically standing on that right now, and the empty lot is where, hey, the empty lot is. That was one of many bad jokes that I will continue to tell. Feel free to groan, you don't have to laugh.
That's cheeseburger.
That's where Cheeseburger was. Take a moment. So, but what I wanted you to do is to kind of take this spot to talk a little bit about Market Street during the Civil War. We're not going to walk all of Market Street just because of time and distance constraints a little bit, but I want to highlight a few cool Market Street stories for you here. So Market Street at the time of the Civil War was kind of the main thoroughfare. Broad Street kind of existed, but it wasn't called Broad Street back then. It was called Railroad Street. Okay? My fault. Okay. Is that a water bottle? Oh, a brick. Okay.
We're all right.
I didn't see anything. So
I put it back.
Broad Street, the next block over, was kind of a railroad, series of railroad tracks. We're going to talk more about those tracks in just a few minutes, but Market Street is kind of the main drag. And we can actually see Market Street in Civil War era photos. And these photos can allow us to see just how quickly Chattanooga and its waterfront grew up during the Civil War. So if you've got your picture packets here, and you look at kind of the next page, it looks like this. The top photo, well, the top and middle one, are both taken from a Union Army fortification called Redoubt
There we go.
Putnam. Lost the word there for a second. They were Redoubt Putnam, which a redoubt is basically just an extension. Sorry about that. It's just an extension of a fortification system called Fort
Great,
Sherman.
thanks.
A Redoubt Putnam was located right where the Unum office is. So anybody work at Unum? Your mom does? She works in a Civil War fort. Things like that's cool. All right? And in fact, we can kind of piece together, based on some landmarks in this photograph, kind of exactly where the photographer was standing. If you're familiar with Walnut Street, the Unum office, kind of right up here, the photographer's standing kind of right where that covered walkway goes over Walnut Street. You kind of know what I'm talking about, some of the locals. So he's looking down at Market. So to get you oriented, and I've got a lot of this labeled here. You can see 5th Street. I've got 4th Street is located. You can see Cherry Street there in front of you on both of those. But in both of these pictures, we can see how much Chattanooga changes. The top photograph was taken in July of 1864. Late July to be specific. The reason we know it was taken in late July is because there was in the wider picture of this is actually a series of panoramics. In the wider picture, we can actually see some mourning flags that are hung up on other buildings for Union General James McPherson, who was killed at the Battle of Atlanta on July 22nd. So we know that that photograph is taken in late July. So what you're looking at is the block between 5th Street and 4th Street. So to get you oriented,
Thanks.
and it's labeled on there. This is right up here at this intersection, where it says the old jail. That jail was built in the 1840s. That's where that Applebee's that closed, I guess, late last year. That's basically where the jail is. The building next door to it, that's where Panera Bread Company is. Then kind of next to that, the next building over is the site of Taco Mac. You can tell I label everything with restaurants. I like to eat. And then where it says the Central House, that's kind of a boarding house here in town. It's located kind of where the parking lot is right up here, and where Bueller's Grocery was. The relatively recently closed little grocery right up here. So that top picture is taken in July of 1864. The bottom picture is kind of taken the following year. So it seems weird because the top picture is a little more developed. But as part of the development of Chattanooga during the Civil War, they had to kind of tear down the old to build the new. And so in the middle picture there, you can see that they've taken out that string of buildings there along Market Street between 5th and 4th. they've leveled it. If you look closely, you can actually see some busted water mains, like there's some geysers of water spewing up. I guess they didn't have the commercials back then telling you to call before you dig. All right, that was a bad one. Y'all can groan at that one too. So, they were tearing all of that down because they needed to build something else. They needed to expand the jail. The jail that was located where Applebee's is. That was one of the city's oldest buildings. It had been built in the early 1840s, right after the creation of Chattanooga. And it was not being used as a prisoner of war facility necessarily, but it's a reflection of kind of how Chattanooga's mission is changing during the Civil War. By 1865, Chattanooga, it's not really a lot of active military operations going on here. What is going on here, we're going to move because this guy in just a minute, because this guy's firing up the weed eater over there. Chattanooga's mission is changing a little bit. They need a jail to hold Union soldiers who are misbehaving, drunkenness, insubordination. Basically, for those of you guys that were ever in the service, this is the brig. And they need to expand that operation. And so what they actually did is they leveled all of those buildings and built a wooden stockade to be able to hold guys in there. So that's what you can see in the bottom picture there. Is I've labeled the jail, which is the closed Applebee's, and then there's that stockade that extends down beyond that. So the moral of the story is, if you go eat at Panera downtown, you're in a Civil War prison camp. So, enjoy your bread and water. That was my other bad joke. Again, I promise it's not the last one. So yeah, I think these pictures are really cool because they allow us to kind of see how Chattanooga evolves over the course of the Civil War. Those top couple of buildings in the top picture, that row of brick buildings, those are all antebellum, 1850s era brick structures. What we wouldn't love to have those still standing, right? But the Army tore them down because the Army needed jail space to be able to hold guerrillas. There are some guerrillas operating in the area. Captain John Gatewood, probably the most prominent of the bunch, but also be able to hold Union soldiers who aren't exactly following the rules, particularly as the war wears on. By the time you get into the spring of 1865, this is a huge garrison town. They know the war's over with. They know they're in the rear. They're bored. And what do bored 22-year-olds do? Get into trouble. So, need the jail. So again, if you eat a Panera, you're in a Civil War prison. If you're in a Taco Mac, you're kind of on the edge of the Civil War prison. No tacos in prisons. No tacos in prisons. All right. So before we move on up Market Street and beyond here, and then we're going to cross at Aquarium Way. Questions, comments, concerns? Yes, sir.
So is the old jail where the Andrews Raiders are held?
Great question. No, that was a separate jail. The jail where Andrews Raiders, which for those of you guys that are familiar with that story, that's in 1862, a group of Union soldiers and a few civilians decided they were going to basically steal a train. The general moved kind of through this area, tearing up train tracks, basically guerrilla type operations. They were arrested, held here in Chattanooga. They were held at another jail called Swain's Jail, which was located kind of back up behind me here, back up off of, I think it's off of High Street. I got the address written down somewhere. I can double check that one for you. But kind of up close to where Unum is in that area. Yes, so many of the guys who were executed from Andrews Raiders are today buried in Chattanooga National Cemetery. Right as you go in the entrance of the cemetery, there's a monument that's there with the train. That's what that is. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you talked about a water main. Was there also a sewer system?
Not really. I mean, this is definitely kind of this transition point of sanitation. They've got some water lines because they do have a lot of, they do have systems to be able to pump water up. I mean, it's not running water like a spigot, but it is, you're basically be able to flush out latrines. So the sewer system is going to be much more along the lines of, we're all going to dig a ditch, and this is where you're going to go. And I knew that because I almost put another picture in here, and I didn't because I said, no, it's a little gross. But I wish I had. Now, if I'd have known you were going to ask that, we'd have had this picture in here. There's actually a great photo of a group of Union soldiers that are up by the they're up by the Hunter Art Museum, and it's a photograph of them, it's like 6 of them, and they're all demonstrating how you use the bathroom. And you can see like McClellan Island back behind them. It's kind of a comical picture. And a bunch of them are goofing around. They've all got their kepis turned on backwards. It looks like some misbehaving reenactors. But it's an original photo of them demonstrating how to poop in 1864. Uniform on, they don't know I'm not a cop. Everybody will stop. Looks like a ranger.
Now smile, you're on candid camera now.
One of the best tours is when I heard about Stringer's Ridge. Down at the end of, when you go into the entrance to Moxie Dam, right on the left there.
That was definitely for me.
Corner there. Is that the tail end of the group?
Four more.
Okay. Cool, we'll let them catch up to us. All right, so this is just gonna be a really quick stop, mostly because I'm a huge baseball fan and I can't not talk about the Chattanooga Lookouts. We're gathered at the base of AT&T Field. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out to you if you're looking at your map. So let's look at the historic map here on the front cover. Where we made the left there onto Market Street, and then we crossed and came up Aquarium Way. It's labeled as 2nd Street on that map. You'll notice that there was no 2nd Street there in 1865. This was kind of a, back behind you guys there at the intersection of Market and Aquarium on this side was a row of warehouses. And what we just walked through was the Union Army's corrals, which you can see labeled on there. Civil War armies functioned on mules and horses. They needed to pull wagons, cannons. That's your primary mode of transportation for officers. Cavalry's based out of here. And so that area we just walked through there is part of the Union Army's corral system for storing and issuing out horses and mules. And where we've stopped, if you look on the map, it's kind of labeled there. It's labeled on there as Pine. Today it's called Power Alley Way. They didn't know that there was going to be a baseball field here. You'll see that we've kind of stopped it right in front of a little greenhouse with a fence around it. It's labeled green. On this Fuller map, there's a color coding system, and green means that it's a private residence. So what's kind of cool is that we can see the spot we're standing right now in the photograph up at the top of that page. So right in the dead center, do you guys see the house with the fence around it? We're standing on the we're standing right in front of the fence. It would have been right here, kind of going up the hill a little bit. So this was somebody's house in 1865. So imagine trying to live here in the middle of an army occupation. I think it'll be a little bit terrifying because your view off the front porch is the corrals. The smell probably isn't very good. And then the hill back behind you is a massive fortification, a fortification called Redoubt Carpenter. So here's my next bad joke of the day. Byron Buxton and Yasiel Puig were not the first people to wield a cannon in the outfield of AT&T Field. Oh, that was a good one. That was a good one. That's not worthy of a groan. So, some of you guys are like, baseball. That's cool. So, Redoubt Carpenter, and this is one of the neat things about that GIS map. If you take this map on the bottom and perfectly overlay it to the one on the top, it actually lines up perfectly. And the two gun positions that had 100-pound Parrott rifles were located respectively in kind of right center field and at first base. So next time you go to a Lookouts game, write your congressman and say that's where we want the next cannon firing programs to be. Out in the outfield there. But it is kind of a neat thing to kind of think about. You know, even something like a baseball field has a Civil War history here to it. And I always think that's just kind of a neat thing. Every time my wife will tell you, I think I saw her running around here somewhere. I can't go in this stadium without like going off on some big Civil War rant, and that's one of the reasons why like nobody ever sits within like 20 rows of me, because I'm loud and I'm talking about the Civil War up there, and it's kind of annoying. But I will say in June, usually the first Monday in June, we do have National Park Night at the Lookouts, where all of the Rangers will all be out here. Usually one of our Rangers throws out the first pitch, and it's a fundraiser for our Park Friends group, which supports a lot of our programs, including some of the ones that we do with Outdoor Chattanooga. So if anybody's just looking for an excuse to go to a Lookouts game and still get to talk Civil War, first Monday in June. All right, so what we're going to do, if you're looking at your maps here, we're going to kind of follow, and we're going to cross. It's called Riverside. It's Riverside Park or Riverfront Parkway now, and we're going to kind of head down out into the river park there a little bit. But before we do, yes.
What's with this little screening on this historic land?
Just a little it's not a drainage, but I mean it's just like a little. I don't know what's the word I'm looking for.
Long gone.
Yeah, I mean it's long gone. But historically there was kind of a little wet weather drainage, I suppose, that peeled off of the river there. There's a lot of things that are on that map that are no longer here, namely the fortification. So if they ever do move the Lookouts, I'm going to be like writing. I want them to turn this into like a big fort park. That'd be great. All right, so let's head on down. We're going to cross and head out to kind of where they do Riverbend. Well, they might, like they'll call the other like lawn rangers. All right, let's go on across here. We got the little walking man here. We're gonna go down the walkway here.
Yeah.
We drive out to
Oh, you go in. There's a couple of ways. I know that you're going to make a run.
Obviously, the outdoors that's part of it. That's part of it. Like I said, this is a partnership.
And I can't do them all. If I did all the programs, we'd be back in the trap. See, I'm looking out. I'm such a giver. I told you we'd get at least one spot we all got to wait out. Any more coming up? Possibly. Possibly. We'll kind of see how everybody's feeling when we get up to a spot up here in just a second. All right. Well, very cool. Well, welcome to what is called. Anybody ever been to Riverbend Festival? Okay, so you know this spot then. This is where Riverbend Festival is. But this is also going to be part of the main kind of feature of Chattanooga's Civil War waterfront. So what I want to do is let's highlight a couple of things to give you a sense for where we are at. If you're looking at your historic map there on the front page, if you look, there's a really darkened in black square there. We're basically sitting inside that black square right now. All right? We'll come back to what that is in just a minute. But what I want to kind of highlight for you is if you look on the back page, the very back of your little packet there, some of you guys have already looked ahead at these, but I love these photographs. These top two photographs were taken from the top of Cameron Hill, looking back down towards the site of the Tennessee Aquarium today. And so we can actually follow our route today. And we can also see a couple of things. I've got a few things labeled there. The top picture was taken in January or February of 1864. We know it's taken around that time because, as you'll see, the military bridge, the present-day Market Street Bridge, is not yet completed. You can also kind of see the beginnings of Redoubt Carpenter. That's the fortification up where the Lookout Stadium is. Where it's got Walnut Street Bridge, the Bluffs, the First Street area. That's that little cluster of houses that we were gathered up at where the little arrow points to it. That's those houses we were gathered at talking about headquarters. You can see where we crossed down and we walked through the corrals. And if you're on the bottom photo, the bottom one was taken sometime probably in 1865 after Chattanooga is this kind of fully operational facility. And again, I've kind of highlighted our route we've gone so far in yellow. You'll see part of our route disappears because you can't see around the hill on the map, on the photograph there. But you can really get a sense for how big Redoubt Carpenter was. You can see it was an earthen fortification, and you can see the gun positions there. Matter of fact, if you've got really good eyes, you can even see a couple of the cannon in that photograph. You can see the corrals that we walked through. And then you can also, on the very bottom photograph, some of you guys may have heard of this group called Rock Creek Aviation. They do kind of tourist sightseeing excursions in a helicopter, but they also do professional photography. And they gave me permission to share this photo that they took. They had their helicopter hovering above the Blue Cross Blue Shield office. Their photographer was basically right at the top of the original 1864, 1865 Cameron Hill. And they just happened to shoot down and line up almost exactly to those top two historic photos. So you can get a sense for what you've just walked through, both in the 1864 and 1865 photos, but also in the modern. And I think that's really kind of cool. And at least these pictures for me gives me a neat perspective as you eat at some of these downtown restaurants, you drive down some of these streets. My wife will tell you I've been insufferable since finding that map the last few weeks. I'm trying to figure out a way to line that map up so it'll be in my Google Maps. So as I'm driving around town, I'm looking at the historic city. It really is kind of cool. And Rock Creek gave us permission to share that photograph. Even though they're professional photographers, they gave us permission to do that. So thank you to those guys. They were here, I'm not sure. But I think those are really cool pictures to kind of highlight. Excuse me. To kind of highlight a little bit of where all we've been and what was underneath us. But I want to talk about where we're at right now. If you're sitting in this spot on June 9th, 2018, there's a good chance you're going to be having a very good time. That'll be the second night of Riverbend Festival this year. And you're going to be sitting on effectively front row seats for Riverbend. But if you were sitting in this very same spot on June 9th, 1865, you would not be having a good time. See, on that map and in that photograph, you can see there's a few warehouses that are labeled. And you can also see that that black building is an armory or an arsenal. That black building is one of two major arsenals that the Army has here in Chattanooga, or magazines rather, where they're storing weapons and ammunition. One is right here where we're sitting. The other is up on the side of Cameron Hill, right about where they've just cut through. So that should make you a little nervous that they cut through a magazine. Hopefully they haven't found anything. But where we're sitting right now, you would not be having a good time if you were sitting right here on June 9th in the year 1865. And an artillerist who was stationed here at that time, a guy named Jenkin Jones, who was with the 6th Wisconsin Battery, published his diary about 20, 30 years after the war, but he tells us about this. And I just want to read from his diary for just a moment. And this is the spot where we're sitting. The wind just blew my page here. Can everybody still hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Great. All right, so he wrote on Friday, he says Chattanooga, Friday, June 9th, and this is 1865. And again, this is the brick building that you can see in the photographs there, particularly in the middle one. It's the black square on the map. And even if you're looking at the photograph on the front cover, you can see it. It's kind of facing the river. And that's where they're storing a lot of ammunition. You'll also notice there's some train tracks that cross right in front of it. Ammunition and train tracks is a bad combination. Chattanooga, Friday, June 9th. This afternoon, a terrible explosion and fire broke out in town about 1 p.m. The large building on the levee filled with artillery ammunition took fire from an engine standing by. The reports of bursting shell were heard continuously, and flames and smoke rolled up with great fearfulness. I went down in time to see giant flames envelop 400 feet of warehouses filled with forage and rations. That's the two big long warehouses you see next to it. Let's see. While the explosions of ammunition, with the fact that still a larger arsenal laid adjacent, he's talking about the Cameron Hill one there. Let's see, and I just lost my spot. The fact that a still larger arsenal laid adjacent, liable to blow up at any moment, caused great consternation among the citizens, women and children fleeing in dismay. I love that line because it is a reminder that even though this is a city under military occupation, it is still a city. People do still live here. Much like probably the people whose house was right there that we stopped at their front porch. They were probably a little nervous about this. But the military were cool and on the ground. Guards spread all over town, asking and all within their reach to work on the fire engines. Assembly sounded in all the camp, and the reserve artillery, as indeed all others needed, marched down en masse. I followed the 6th. We reached the riverbank, one engine playing on one end of the military bridge, which was in imminent danger of taking fire. So this gives you a sense of just how big this is. He's worried about this lighting up the magazine back behind you guys. He's worried. They're worried about it catching the military bridge, which is the Market Street Bridge, on fire because the warehouses are already lit up. A city built of wood, fire is bad. It says again, we reached the riverbank, one engine playing on one end of the military bridge, which was in imminent danger of taking fire. Another working on the roof of the brick arsenal, that's where we're sitting, containing 750,000 tons of ammunition. That's a big boom. I think you think about the fireworks down here a little different, huh? Strings of men passing buckets. We were double-quicked under the fiery breath of the burning machine by Albie Sweet, that's one of the other men in his company, and set to work on the double-decker water engine. We were playing on the arsenal not 5 rods distant. The heat so great that the water was dried before it ran off. 5 rods is about 27 yards, so for you football fans, a short field goal away. That's how close he is, and they're throwing water buckets, and the water's evaporating and drying before it can do anything. We're in a scary spot right now. Had the wind wavered a little, nothing could have saved it, and with all probability, most of us would have been hurled into eternity. But luckily, we were saved, notwithstanding the shells were still exploding over us. So 750,000 tons of ammunition, artillery shells. This thing's lit up by a spark from the train, and you can imagine just all these artillery shells just blowing off into the air, exploding, looking like fireworks, but this is a terrifying spot. And now I come to another sorrowful page in my diary. When the imminent danger was over and the flames somewhat checked, some officers, prompted by the devil or some other demon, ordered whiskey barrels rolled out and the heads knocked in around the engines. And oh, what a change. The strong arms of men working in sober earnestness were stopped by the deadly fires of poisonous drugs termed whiskey. The air rent with yells and oaths fit only for pandemonium. This to me was heart-sickening, and as soon as we could evade the guards, Milt Hungerford and myself came to camp. Jenkins Jones is a fairly religious fellow, and this is June of 1865, right? I mean, the war is over, but they're still having to be here as soldiers on garrison duty. Nobody wants to get killed 2 months after the war's over with. I mean, nobody wants to get killed anyway, but you especially don't want to get killed in an artillery accident 2 months afterwards. You're just trying to hang on and go home. And they survived this, or at least all of his buddies do, and the officers all bring out a bunch of whiskey. And you can kind of see them all sitting along the riverbanks here, getting drunk off whiskey, because you've just survived something that's a little terrifying. The next day, he wrote, Chattanooga, Saturday, June 10th, a cloudy, sultry day. In vain did we await the coming of a cool, refreshing shower which would settle the dust and all make us feel younger. Nary a drop fell. Drew Forage, on duty loading hay in the afternoon, camp policed, etc. The exciting scenes of yesterday have furnished the subject of conversation today, and happily the grapevine is forgotten. The inebriated look very sheepish and ashamed today. Well, they might. 7,000 bales of hay were destroyed yesterday. $250,000 to $500,000 of property destroyed in all. 8 lives lost. 1 woman broke both arms. Many soldiers wounded. The waterfront here in 1864 and 1865 is what made Chattanooga tick. A couple of you guys have asked, how many people lived in Chattanooga during the Civil War? Before the Civil War started, Chattanooga had 2,500 residents. By 1865, you're looking at tens of thousands of soldiers stationed here on garrison duty. This is all very hastily built, and it's not exactly the safest thing in the world. And you can kind of see that in some of these pictures. Nowadays, I mean, if you're doing this, kind of by the book, you would never have train tracks right by 750,000 tons of black powder ammunition. That's asking for trouble, but you're trying to win a war. And that leads to one of Chattanooga's kind of first great industrial accidents, kind of right here where we're standing. So again, if anybody comes to the opening weekend of Riverbend Festival, you're standing in a spot that has a little bit of a tragic past to it. But they rebuilt it, and it's been rebuilt by the time they drew that map in December of 1865. And all of these warehouses, all of these train tracks are what's going to prime the growth of Chattanooga after the Civil War. Many towns throughout the South during the Civil War were kind of left, that's the word I'm looking for, left barren, right? They've been damaged, they've been destroyed. Chattanooga was reborn kind of from the ashes of this spot, if you kind of want to get poetic a little bit. All of these warehouses, the train tracks, the docks that they've got built all along this riverfront, all of this is what's going to drive Chattanooga's growth between 1865 and into the mid-20th century. It's kind of the leftover infrastructure of the Union Army anchored here along the waterfront. So before we move on kind of to our next spot, you guys have questions, comments? Yes, ma'am. Yes, so there's a couple of other things that are in the area, and again, go play with that GIS map online. You can really line some of this stuff up. But right around the corner from us was a shipyard, so just past where the Southern Belle is parked was a shipyard where they were building ships, not at all unlike the Southern Belle. You got to see the picture 1 on the front page there. If you keep moving on around the corner, kind of close to where like Siskin Steel is, what's that place that just closed? I forget the name of it. Yeah, that one. There was a huge rolling mill that was there where they were pumping out iron and stuff to build the new train tracks that are all over the area. And then there's also some other iron foundries that are located kind of upriver as well. Yes, sir.
Do you know about how long Union troops were garrisoned here after?
Yes. So Jenkins Jones, they leave about 3 weeks after that. The Union Army is here until the fall of 1865. At that point, Chattanooga kind of returns to civilian control. And one of the reasons they were able to do that here is because one of the reasons the Union Army felt so comfortable doing that here so quickly was because this area was relatively pro-Union to begin with. Some of the prominent leaders of the city had been pro-Confederate, but a lot of people hadn't been, and so they didn't feel like they needed a huge military presence here. But the other thing that's happening is a lot of these guys are getting out of the Army, and let's say you worked on the warehouses down here. You've got connections now. You know people. I'm out of the Army. I'm just going to come right back down here and start working. And so there's a large number of Union veterans that moved back to Chattanooga. In fact, between 1865 and I think it's 1900, I think there's 6 Union veterans that are elected mayor of Chattanooga. Most prominent being a guy named John Wilder, who operated the Roan Iron Works upriver just a little bit. And a lot of those guys are coming back in here using their connections as quartermasters and that kind of stuff. So again, the Union Army didn't feel like they had to have this hard hand of military occupation here. Yes, ma'am. It's just called an artillerist's diary. If you give me a second, I'll give you the publication date on it. You might be able to find this one online through like Google Books or something. Google Books or archive.org. It's just called an artilleryman's diary. by Jenkins Jones, and it was published in February of 1914. So he published it, years later, and he embellished a bit. I doubt he wrote that much, sitting out here in his little notebook. All right. Well, very cool. Well, let's keep moving. And as we're walking down the river banks here, again, you would be passing lots and lots and lots of ships, warehouses, stuff that's kind of driving the economic growth of a city under military occupation.
Good to see it drop down a ways since it was a few weeks ago. It was pretty high up.
Yeah. Nice blue herring.
Right. I think most of the group is caught back up to us now. And we've got a little traffic overhead. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. All right, well, so where we just walked is along the riverfront here, the river walk. And of course, this keeps on going. Today you can actually take the river walk just about from the dam almost all the way up to Lookout Mountain, which is really kind of cool. For those of you guys that are into hiking and biking and kind of urban exploration, it's a great place to do that. But what I want to do is kind of gather up here for just a second before we take the switchbacks up. There's no stairs. That's good, right? So before we take the switchbacks up, I want to talk about a couple of things that we're going to see along this that are pretty cool. Somebody asked earlier, is there anything that's antebellum or that was here at the time? And he said not really, but there is kind of sort of right here. Before the Civil War, there's kind of two major things happening here on the riverfront, or on Chattanooga's waterfront. One is Ross's Landing, which we crossed. Most of you guys probably saw the Cherokee markers and stuff there. That was established in 1816 by a Cherokee leader named John Ross as kind of just a river crossing. And there's a series of small little hotels, taverns, that kind of stuff, warehouses sprung up around that. The Army built in 1864 built the military bridge, the modern Market Street Bridge, right across that. But the other kind of big operation that was happening here along Chattanooga's waterfront was the Bluff Furnace, which was owned by a guy named Robert Cravens. Some of you guys are familiar with the Cravens house up on Lookout Mountain. Robert Cravens, it kind of moved into the area in a couple of decades before the Civil War. He built Cravens House in the 1850s, called it Alta Vista was the fancy name he gave the home. But his kind of main means of economic income is the Bluff Furnace, which was located right here. And this is one of the big kind of economic activities here in the region, both before the war but also after. And that is, it's an iron foundry. They're taking kind of natural resources, converting it into iron, and that's a huge deal here because of trains. Lots and lots and lots of iron. Steel is all needed for trains. Fast forward kind of to the Civil War, and over the course of the war, much of his furnace, it wasn't necessarily destroyed, but it got repurposed. You can actually see it marked on that historic map. Our route kind of goes right over to, there's a little circle that's there. That's the little tower that you can see marked by, well, the metal cylinder tower looking thing right here to my left. Now, after the Civil pulling out in the summer and fall of 1865, they had lots and lots and lots of surplus wagons, right? We just passed through the corrals just a few minutes ago. Well, the Army, like every good government operation, wasn't exactly going to sell these wagons off in an efficient manner. You couldn't just buy an individual wagon. You had to buy them in lots of multiple wagons. Well, nobody around can afford that. But nobody knows that Robert Cravens is basically broke at this point. So Robert Cravens goes to the Army, writes them a bad check, buys up just about every Army wagon in Chattanooga, then turns around, sells them off to all the individual citizens who are here individually, makes a huge profit, and that's how he rebuilds not only his home up on Lookout Mountain, but kind of gets his industry restarted here. Now, over time, that industry moved away from here along the bluffs. And those iron and steel foundries kind of moved out. The Roan Iron Works upriver a little ways. They kind of moved out of the area. And the bluff furnace kind of fell into ruins. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, some erosion here along the hillside began to expose rock work, and people started to look at it and go, hey, that doesn't look natural. And they began to do some excavations and basically found the ruins of that original kind of waterfront industry here in Chattanooga, the ruins of the bluff furnace. So as we're walking up this little path, if you look off to the left, you're going to see the ruins of walls. You can kind of look down. They built this little cylinder, this metal cylinder kind of right over the top of the blast furnace, so you can kind of see where it would have been, how big it would have been. But I just kind of want to point that out as we're going through, is that this is kind of something that is original to Chattanooga Civil War and even pre-war waterfront that is still here. It's no longer functional, but it is still here. And so what we'll do is we'll walk up, we'll gather up right at the top of the hill here, point out one last thing, and then we'll head back across. Sound good?
If anyone left their mic sound boxes, go back to the good.
Any Union gunboats moving up and down the river. And so here at the Hunter Art Museum, you know, we think about the historic house that's up here. That house was not here at the time of the war, but this is all built on top of a Confederate Army camp from 1862 and into early 1863. An Army camp and gun emplacements that were designed to, again, defend the river. And it was effective to a degree. A little while before the battles for Chattanooga, Union forces did actually move out into Stringer's Ridge across the river and actually shelled the city a little bit, just to kind of let the Confederates know that they're here, that the war is coming. But by the time the Union Army took control of this area, they felt they didn't need a big fortification right here. They already control the river. They don't need a fort guarding that. And so they began to move their fortification lines out, kind of defending that direction. And so we're also located inside a Union Army fortification position. Fort Sherman, it was a series of redoubts and earthworks that stretched from just back behind us here, kind of close to where the 27, where the Veterans Bridge is, if you're familiar, there's a little neighborhood back there close to the Bluffview Arts District. There's a little neighborhood back there called Battery Place. It's called Battery Place because that's where the Union Army batteries were. Batteries being a fancy term for kind of gun positions. So Fort Sherman kind of stretched out across, all the way out to Redoubt Putnam, which was where the Unum building was, where where some of those photographs were taken. Then ringing the city was a series of other fortifications. Fort Wood, that was later renamed Fort Creighton, but you can still see evidence of that today around the UTC campus. The whole neighborhood over there is called Fort Wood. Stretched all the way around. They had a massive hospital facility on the hill just behind where the Reed House is today. There's a huge train station there where the library is. Almost everywhere you go in this city, somewhere underfoot is something related to Civil War era Chattanooga. And so what I want to end with is by cycling back to that historic map that's on the front side there. Right underneath it, I've got a website on there, and I mentioned this at the start. That map is not some super secret thing that I have. That map is public access. You guys have access to it. And clear off your afternoon because you will get mentally sucked into it. It is a really cool object. Go to the Hamilton County GIS website and select Civil War and select that 1865 military map of Chattanooga. And it's amazing how accurate they drew that map. It's to scale. You can figure out where buildings stop and end historically. The roads line up perfectly, all the way from here, all the way out to the National Cemetery. It's really astounding. So if you live, work, or even just visit the area here around downtown Chattanooga, I encourage you to take some time the next rainy day you have. Get outside today, but the next rainy day you have, spend some time with that. Again, that's not some secret map that I have hidden away in some archive that we're going to break out this one little tiny square of. Take that thing, use it. It's really cool. And I think more than anything, that map, as well as some of the photographs that are out around on websites like the Library of Congress and National Archives, give us a better sense than I ever could through any stories of kind of what happened here underfoot in Chattanooga. So with that being said, questions, comments, concerns? Anything that I didn't talk about that you want me to
This website, I've been on it before, but it's mainly just a map like this. There's old maps on it.
Yeah, so over on, if you select the one where it says like Civil War, on the left-hand side of it, there's a thing where you can start selecting different maps. And so you can like select different layers to drop in on top of it. They've got that historic map as one of the layers you can select.
Oh, okay.
And it overlays perfect.
It looks
It's really
old.
cool.
It's old.
It's really cool. And again, my email address is on the front of that packet. So if you have another question that comes up later, you're having a hard time accessing that map, you want to, whatever, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out with it. Or if you just want another copy of the packet that I got, I'll send you another one of those as well. But thank you guys for visiting. I'm going to walk back across the glass bridge here, then head back out across the Walnut Street Bridge. I know some of you guys, I know some people are a little iffy about this bridge, so if you would like to double back around and cross on your own, you're more than welcome to do that. Or if you want to stay out on the south side here and grab some lunch, whatever. But thank you guys for visiting. And again, if you're going to be in the area today, Point Park is free admission this afternoon. And tomorrow is going to be rainy, and so play on the Hamilton County GIS page tomorrow. So thank you guys.
Great job. Great job.
Yep.
Enjoyed it.
I appreciate it. Good to see you guys as always.